He was just a single dad trying to keep his daughter warm, but when he gave his only jacket to a stranger shivering at a bus stop, he had no idea he was handing it to a lonely billionaire who would change his world forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain fell not in drops, but in gray, weary sheets, blurring the edges of the city into a watercolor of smudged headlights and dripping awnings. It was the kind of cold that seeped through denim and settled deep in your bones, a damp, persistent chill that no amount of brisk walking could shake. Liam clutched his daughter's hand tighter, his knuckles white against the biting wind. Maya, all of 8 years old and bundled in a puffy pink coat that had seen better winters, skipped beside him, her small boots splashing in puddles with a joyful abandon that Liam both envied and cherished. She didn't feel the cold, not the way he did. For her, the rain was a drumbeat, the city lights were jewels, and this walk home from the library was an adventure. For Liam, it was a calculation. It was the worn tread on his work boots, the dwindling numbers in his bank account, the quiet ache in his back from a long day of hauling drywall at a site that paid too little, too late. He pulled the collar of his thin flannel-lined jacket closer, the fabric damp and offering little defense against the relentless drizzle. It was his only real jacket, the one he wore for everything from work to weekend errands. Its faded brown canvas, a map of past struggles, a faint paint smudge on the sleeve, a small tear near the pocket he kept meaning to patch. They were almost at their corner, the one with the flickering street lamp and the bus stop shelter whose plexiglass was so scratched it looked like frozen rain, when Maya pointed. "Daddy, look at that lady." Liam followed her gaze. A woman stood alone under the shelter, but she wasn't inside it. She was pressed against the outer wall, as if trying to become one with the grimy glass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, the kind that was utterly wrong for this weather, for this part of town, for this Tuesday evening. It was a dress meant for quiet restaurants with linen tablecloths, not for a bus stop in a downpour. Her hair, a dark curtain of silk, was plastered to her temples, and her shoulders trembled with a violence that was impossible to ignore. She wasn't just cold, she was freezing. A solitary figure caught in a storm she hadn't prepared for. People hurried past, heads down, umbrellas tilted like shields, each person locked in their own world of hurry and home. But Maya had stopped, and so Liam stopped too. He watched the woman for a moment, the way she clenched her jaw, the way her eyes, wide and stunningly blue, stared at nothing. There was a raw vulnerability in her stillness that went beyond the cold. It was the look of someone who had been left behind. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for months after his wife was gone. Without a second thought, without a single calculation, Liam unzipped his jacket. The gesture was so instinctive, so immediate, that Liam didn't even register the decision until the cold hit his own back like a slap. The rain, which had been a nuisance through the jacket, was now a direct assault, soaking through his thin, long-sleeved shirt in seconds. He shivered, a deep, involuntary tremor, but his eyes stayed on the woman. Maya watched him, her own small face a mixture of confusion and a quiet, innate understanding that this was what her father did. This was who he was. He walked toward the bus stop, the worn jacket held out in front of him like an offering. The woman didn't seem to notice him at first, her focus still lost somewhere in the gray expanse of the street. "Excuse me," Liam said, his voice quiet but steady enough to cut through the drumming of the rain. She flinched, her head snapping toward him. Her eyes, which he now saw were the color of a stormy sea, widened with a flash of alarm, the kind of reflexive fear a person learns in a city that isn't always kind. She took a half-step back, her posture tensing, ready to run. He saw the flicker of panic and immediately stopped, holding his hands up slightly, the jacket still dangling from one. "I'm not," he started, then paused, trying to find the right words. "You just look cold. Really cold." He held the jacket out a little farther. "Here, take it." She stared at the jacket, then at his face, then back at the jacket. The alarm in her eyes slowly receded, replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. She seemed to be trying to process the gesture, to find the angle, the catch, the price tag that had to be attached. In her world, nothing was ever given without an expectation of return. I can't," she stammered, her voice a low, rough whisper, hoarse from the cold. "You'll be freezing," he offered a small, tired smile. "I'm tougher than I look. Besides, my daughter and I are just around the corner. You look like you've got a longer wait." He glanced at Maya, who was now standing a few feet behind him, a small, solemn guardian in a bright pink coat. The woman followed his gaze, and her expression softened almost imperceptibly as she took in the sight of the little girl. The fear was gone now, replaced by a fragile curiosity. "Please," Liam said again, his voice gentle but firm. "It's just a jacket." He stepped forward, and this time she didn't move away. He carefully draped the jacket over her trembling shoulders. It was oversized on her, the worn canvas swallowing her delicate frame, but the effect was immediate. The violent shivering subsided into a less frantic tremor. The fabric, still holding the faint warmth of his own body, was a small shield against the hostile air. He could smell the faint, expensive scent of her perfume, something like rain and night-blooming flowers, a scent that didn't belong on this gritty street corner. For a moment, they just stood there, the rain soaking his hair and running in rivulets down his face, the sound of the city, a distant hum around them. She clutched the lapels of the jacket, her long, pale fingers wrapping around the worn fabric, as if it were a lifeline. Isabella felt the warmth first, a dull, spreading heat that seemed to coax the ice from her bones. It wasn't just the physical warmth of the jacket, it was the impossible, unearned kindness of the gesture that stunned her into silence. She clutched the thick, worn fabric, the scent of rain, sawdust, and something uniquely, honestly male filling her senses. It was a scent of a life lived, of hard work and tired evenings, a scent so foreign to her own sterile world of glass towers and curated air that it was almost intoxicating. She looked up at the man, really looked at him for the first time. His face was angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. His hair, dark and soaked, was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, a deep, steady brown, held a quiet weariness that she recognized, though she knew their weariness came from entirely different worlds. He was shivering now, his thin gray shirt clinging to his frame, but he stood as if he didn't feel it, his focus entirely on her. "Thank you," she finally managed to say, the words feeling small and inadequate. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. He wasn't looking for thanks. He wasn't looking for anything. That was the most disorienting part of it all. "Daddy, we're getting all wet." Maya's small voice piped up from behind him, a gentle reminder of the world beyond this strange, suspended moment. The man glanced back at his daughter, and his face transformed. The weariness softened, the hard lines around his eyes crinkling into a smile of pure, unadulterated love. "I know, sweet pea. Let's go." He turned back to Isabella, his expression shifting back to one of polite concern. "You be safe, okay?" He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask what had happened to leave her stranded and shaking in a dress that cost more than his monthly rent. He didn't ask for the jacket back. He just gave, and then he prepared to walk away. "Wait," Isabella said, her voice a little stronger now. "Your jacket. How will I? How can I return it to you?" He hesitated, as if the thought hadn't even occurred to him. He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking momentarily flustered. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's just an old jacket." "No, I insist," she pressed, a flicker of her usual take-charge self returning. "It's important to me that I return it." He seemed to consider this, his gaze shifting from her face to the jacket she was wearing, then back again. He finally let out a small, tired sigh, as if arguing was more effort than it was worth. "Okay," he said. "I work construction over at the new build on Elm Street. Liam, you can. You can just drop it with the foreman there if you want." He didn't offer a last name, no phone number, no easy way to find him. It was a dismissal wrapped in compliance, a way of appeasing her without inviting her into his life. He took Maya's hand again, gave a final nod, and turned, melting back into the rain-slicked street. Isabella stood there, clutching the warm, heavy jacket around her, and watched them go. She watched until their figures were just two small shapes disappearing into the gloom, a father and a daughter against the world, and in the profound silence they left behind, she felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in years, a deep, aching, and utterly unfamiliar loneliness. The warmth of the jacket was a strange comfort as Isabella finally slid into the back of the black town car that had pulled up silently to the curb moments after Liam and Maya had disappeared. The driver, a man she'd employed for years, yet whose first name she sometimes forgot, didn't say a word about her soaked dress or the oversized, rugged jacket she wore like a shield. He was paid for his discretion, for his ability to see nothing. Tonight, she was grateful for it. As the car moved smoothly through the rain-slicked streets, leaving the gritty neighborhood behind and heading toward the sterile gleam of her downtown penthouse, Isabella couldn't stop touching the jacket's worn fabric. She ran her fingers over the soft, frayed flannel lining, tracing the seam of a pocket that felt like it had held the same set of keys or a folded-up grocery list 1,000 times. This jacket had a history, a life woven into its threads. It smelled of the cold night air, of rain, and faintly of him, that honest, grounding scent of a man who worked with his hands. She pulled her phone from her clutch, the screen glowing with a dozen missed calls from her board chairman and a string of texts from her assistant, all marked with the red exclamation point of urgency. The messages were about quarterly reports, a merger that was hitting a snag, a press leak she was supposed to contain. It was her world, the one she had meticulously built, the one she had sacrificed everything for, and tonight it felt 1,000,000 miles away. She ignored the notifications and instead typed Elm Street construction site into the search bar. A map bloomed on the screen, a small red pin marking a location just a few miles from where she'd been standing, yet a universe away from where she was now. Liam. He'd given her his name, but nothing else. He hadn't wanted to be found. He had simply seen a person in need and acted. The sheer, uncalculated purity of it was what she couldn't get her head around. In her world, every act of kindness was a transaction, a networking opportunity, a carefully placed chess move. A favor given was a favor owed. But he hadn't wanted a favor. He had wanted her to be warm. The car pulled into the private underground garage of her building. The air was dry, climate-controlled, and silent. She stepped out, the jacket still wrapped around her, and walked toward the elevator. As the polished steel doors slid shut, she caught her reflection, a woman in a $1,000 dress and a borrowed, grease-stained jacket, looking more lost than she had while shivering in the rain. She held the fabric to her face, closed her eyes, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt the sting of tears. She hadn't just been given a jacket, she had been shown a glimpse of a world she didn't know still existed. The next morning, Liam woke to the familiar ache in his lower back and the scent of brewing coffee, a small luxury he allowed himself on payday. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, casting a pale, shadowless light into their small apartment. He stood at the window, looking down at the wet street below, his thoughts drifting back to the woman at the bus stop. He hoped she was okay. He hoped she had gotten where she needed to go. He tried not to think about the jacket, about the gnawing cold he'd felt on the walk home, the kind that had settled in his chest and made him cough through the night. It was a stupid, impulsive thing to do. He had a daughter to think about, a job that required him to be healthy. He couldn't afford to get sick over a stranger. But then he remembered the look in her eyes, not just cold, but lost. Utterly and completely lost. And he knew he would do it again. "Daddy, can I have the swirly cereal today?" Maya's voice, bright and full of morning hope, pulled him from his thoughts. He turned and smiled, the worry on his face melting away instantly. "The swirly cereal it is, my queen." The apartment was small. The furniture, a collection of second-hand finds and pieces they'd had since before his wife Sarah had passed. Every corner held a memory: the scuff on the wall where Maya had crashed her tricycle, the bookshelf Sarah had painted a cheerful yellow, now filled with Maya's colorful drawings and well-loved storybooks. It was a life built on love, but held together with fraying threads. The landlord had already sent 2 notices about the rent, and the pile of bills on the counter seemed to grow overnight. Liam pushed the thoughts away. Today was a work day. He had to focus. He packed Maya's lunch: a sandwich, an apple, and a cookie he'd saved for her, and walked her to school, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his thin hoodie, the wind cutting right through it. At the construction site, the air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and sawdust. His foreman, a burly man named Sal, gave him a once-over as he arrived. "Where's your jacket, Liam? You'll freeze your butt off." "Left it at home." Liam lied, grabbing his hard hat. He couldn't explain the truth without sounding like an idiot or a saint, and he was neither. He was just a man who knew what it felt like to be alone in a storm. He worked all day, his muscles protesting, his mind a million miles away. He kept glancing toward the site entrance, a knot of something he couldn't name tightening in his stomach every time a car pulled up. He told himself he didn't expect her to come. People like her, with her expensive dress and her air of quiet tragedy, didn't wander onto construction sites. She'd probably thrown the jacket away. And yet, he couldn't shake the image of her face, the feeling of her hand as he'd wrapped the jacket around her. It was a connection, however brief, that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in a long, long time. Isabella spent the morning in a state of suspended animation. She sat in her penthouse, the city sprawling beneath her like a map of a kingdom she no longer wanted to rule, and held the jacket in her lap. She had canceled her morning meetings, ignored the frantic calls, and told her assistant she was unreachable. For the first time in her career, she had simply stopped. The jacket was an anchor to a different reality. She examined it closely, her fingers tracing the mended tear near the cuff. A testament to a life where things were fixed, not replaced. The label was so faded it was illegible, but the fabric was soft from 1,000 washes. It was a garment of pure utility, yet it held more character than anything in her own walk-in closet, a sterile museum of designer labels and fabrics that had never known a single drop of rain. She couldn't just send a courier to the construction site. That felt cheap, transactional. It would turn his act of pure kindness into an errand, a task to be checked off a list. No. She had to go herself. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her life was a fortress of control, every moment scheduled, every interaction managed. To walk onto a construction site, unannounced and out of place, was to surrender that control completely. She changed out of her silk pajamas and stood in front of her closet, a vast expanse of blacks, grays, and navy blues. Nothing seemed right. Everything she owned was a costume, a uniform for the role of Isabella Thorne, the formidable CEO of Thorne Industries. Finally, she pulled out a pair of simple black trousers, a soft cashmere sweater, and a pair of flat, practical boots she hadn't worn in years. She looked at her reflection and saw a Strangiera woman stripped of her usual armor. She had the jacket dry cleaned. The man at the high-end establishment had looked at it with thinly veiled disdain, his eyes flicking from the worn canvas to her expensive watch. "An unusual piece, Ms. Thorne," he'd said. "It's important," was all she'd replied. When she picked it up, it was pristine, the faint scent of him replaced by the sterile smell of cleaning chemicals. She almost regretted it. The imperfection had been part of its story. With the clean, neatly folded jacket in a simple paper bag, she got into her Carnot, the chauffeured town car, but her own private vehicle, a sleek but understated sedan she kept for the rare moments she wanted to feel anonymous. As she drove toward Elm Street, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was nervous. It was a feeling so foreign, so forgotten, that she almost laughed. $1 billion deals didn't make her nervous. Hostile takeovers didn't make her nervous. But the thought of facing a quiet, tired-eyed construction worker who had shown her a moment of grace, that terrified her. She was stepping out of her world and into his. with nothing to offer but a return jacket, and a thank you that felt wholly insufficient. Liam was on his lunch break, sitting on a stack of drywall and eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag when he saw the car. It was a dark gray sedan, clean and quiet, the kind of car that didn't belong in a lot filled with mud-splattered work trucks and dented vans. It parked near the site's temporary office, and for a long, heart-stopping moment, no one got out. Liam's hand, holding the sandwich, froze halfway to his mouth. He told himself it wasn't her. It was an architect, an inspector, a city official, but the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. Then the driver's side door opened, and she stepped out. She looked different today. The haunted, desperate look was gone, replaced by a quiet composure. She wore simple, dark clothes and flat boots, but she still carried an air of elegance that seemed to emanate from her very posture. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, low ponytail, and her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She stood by her car, clutching a paper bag, and scanned the chaotic construction site. Liam could feel the eyes of the other workers on her. Whistles and low murmurs rippled through the air. She was a swan who had wandered into a flock of crows, and everyone noticed. She didn't seem to see him at first, her gaze sweeping over the maze of scaffolding and half-finished walls. Liam felt a sudden, ridiculous urge to hide, to melt back into the shadows of the building. He was covered in a fine layer of dust. His hands were calloused and dirty, and his hoodie felt thin and inadequate. He was a world away from the kind of men she was probably used to. But then her eyes found him. They locked across the yard, and the noise of the scythe saws, the hammers, the shouts seemed to fade into a distant hum. A flicker of something crossed her face relief, maybe, or perhaps just recognition. She took a breath and started walking toward him, her steps measured and deliberate on the uneven, muddy ground. Sal, his foreman, whistled low beside him. "Who's that, Liam? You got friends in high places?" Liam didn't answer. He stood up, brushing the dust from his jeans, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He felt exposed, like she could see right through him the unpaid bills, the worn-out boots, the quiet desperation he worked so hard to hide. She stopped a few feet in front of him, the paper bag held between them like a shield. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Liam." "Hi," he managed, his own voice rough. He cleared his throat. "You found it!" "You made it easy," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. She held out the bag. "I wanted to return this, and to say thank you properly this time." He took the bag, the paper crinkling in his grip. He could feel the familiar weight of the jacket inside, clean and impersonal now. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, her blue eyes holding his, "but I wanted to." The silence that stretched between them was thick with unspoken things. The other construction workers had gone back to their own lunches, but their curious glances still felt like a weight on Liam's shoulders. He was acutely aware of the chasm between them, her clean, expensive boots on the muddy ground, his dust-covered clothes, the sleek sedan parked next to his rust-pocked truck. It was a visual reminder of two worlds colliding, and he wasn't sure he belonged in the intersection. "I'm Isabella," she said finally, as if realizing she'd never given him her name. "Liam," he repeated, though she already knew. He clutched the bag, not knowing what else to do with his hands. "Well, thanks for bringing it back. You really didn't need to." He was trying to give her an out, a polite end to the conversation, so she could retreat to her world and he could retreat to his. It was safer that way. But she didn't take it. Instead, she gestured vaguely at the sandwich he'd abandoned. "I'm sorry, am I interrupting your lunch?" "No, it's fine," he said, though his appetite had vanished. "You saved me from a pretty boring sandwich, to be honest." A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine one he'd seen. It transformed her face, softening the elegant, reserved lines and letting a flicker of warmth through. "I know the feeling," she said. "I think my last 3 meals have been catered and served on bone china, and I couldn't tell you what any of them were. The comment was casual, but it hung in the air. Another small, gleaming piece of a life he couldn't imagine. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. He should say goodbye. He should thank her again and walk away. But he was rooted to the spot, held there by the quiet intensity of her gaze. She wasn't looking at him with pity or curiosity or any of the other things he might have expected. She was looking at him with something that felt dangerously like recognition. "The little girl with you last night," she said, her voice softer. "Your daughter?" "Yeah," Liam said, a wave of protectiveness washing over him. "That's Maya." "She's beautiful," Isabella said simply. "She has your eyes." "She has her mother's spirit," he corrected, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He rarely talked about Sarah to anyone, let alone a stranger. Isabella's expression softened with a deep, immediate empathy. "I'm sorry," she said, and he could tell she meant it. The air shifted. This was no longer about a jacket. It was about something deeper, something far more complicated. "Look," Liam said, needing to regain his footing, to put the walls back up. "I appreciate you coming all the way down here. But I've got to get back to work." "Of course," she said, her composure returning. She took a small step back. I wanted to ask if I could do something to repay you, for your kindness. A meal, or—" He cut her off, his tone a little sharper than he intended. "It wasn't a transaction. I don't need to be repaid." Her face fell slightly, and he immediately felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't meant to be harsh. "I just mean," he added, softening his voice, "it was just a jacket, that's all." She nodded, though he could see the disappointment in her eyes. "Okay, Liam." She turned to leave, and he felt a sudden, sharp pang of regret. He had pushed her away, just like he pushed everyone away. It was his default setting, his shield against getting hurt again. But as he watched her walk back toward her car, he knew that letting her go was a mistake. "Wait," he called out, the word leaving his mouth before his brain could veto it. Isabella stopped, her hand on the car door, and turned back to him, her expression hopeful but guarded. Liam's heart was pounding. He was stepping off a ledge, and he didn't know if there was anything below to catch him. He walked toward her, the paper bag with the jacket still clutched in his hand. I was out of line," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry. I'm not used to people offering." She gave a small, understanding nod. "And I'm not used to people giving without wanting something in return. I think we're both a little out of our element." He managed a faint smile. "Yeah, you could say that." He looked down at the bag, then back at her. The idea was crazy. It made no sense. But the thought of her driving away, of this strange, fragile connection dissolving back into nothing, felt worse. "My daughter and I," he started, the words feeling clumsy. "We have this tradition. Hot chocolate at this little diner down the street on Fridays. It's nothing fancy, but she loves it." He took a breath. "If you really want to do something, you could. You could let me buy you a cup, to say thanks for bringing the jacket back." He waited for her to politely decline, to make an excuse about a meeting or a prior engagement. A woman like her didn't spend her Friday afternoons in a greasy spoon diner with a construction worker. But her face broke into a real, radiant smile, a smile that lit up her entire being and made his breath catch in his chest. "I'd like that very much, Liam," she said, her voice full of a warmth that had been missing before. "What time?" 5? He suggested, still slightly stunned that she had agreed. "I pick Maya up from her after-school program then." 5 it is, she said. She gave him the name of the diner, a place called The Corner Booth, and a small, almost shy wave before getting into her car. Liam stood in the muddy lot and watched her drive away, the low hum of her engine a stark contrast to the rattling trucks around him. He looked down at the jacket in the bag, then back at the empty space where her car had been. He had no idea what he had just done. He had invited a mystery into his life, a woman from a world he didn't understand. It was reckless. It was illogical. and for the first time in a very long time, it felt like hope. The rest of the week passed in a blur of dust and routine, but for Liam, something had fundamentally shifted. The gray, monotonous rhythm of his days was now punctuated by a single, shining point on the horizon: Friday at 5. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, while measuring a 2x4, while eating his lunch, while lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling. He replayed their brief conversations, dissecting her words, the look in her eyes, the small, sad smile that seemed to hint at a story she wasn't telling. He knew he was being a fool. A woman like that, with her quiet elegance and her expensive car, was just passing through. She was a tourist in his world, and this hot chocolate was likely just a polite, charitable gesture, a way to close the loop on her debt of kindness before she disappeared for good. He tried to convince himself that's all it was, that he should expect nothing more. But his heart, a stubborn and foolish organ, refused to listen. On Friday morning, he woke up with a knot of nervous energy in his stomach. He picked out his best shirta dark blue button-down that wasn't faded or stained and spent a little too long trying to tame his hair in the mirror. Maya noticed immediately. "You're wearing your fancy shirt, Daddy," she said. Her head tilted as she ate her swirly cereal. "Is today a special day?" "Nope," he said a little too quickly, "just felt like it." She gave him a knowing look, the kind of look that said she was 8, not stupid, but she didn't press. At work, the day dragged on endlessly. Every hammer blow, every shout, every minute felt like an eternity. He was clumsy, distracted, his mind already at the corner booth. When the clock finally hit 4:30, he practically ran to his truck, his heart pounding a nervous, excited rhythm. He picked up Maya from her after-school program, a noisy, cheerful room in the basement of the local community center. She ran into his arms, her face bright with a day's worth of stories. "Guess what, Daddy? We made macaroni necklaces." "That's amazing, sweet pea," he said, his eyes scanning her face, his love for her, a fierce, protective anchor in the swirling sea of his own uncertainty. As they drove toward the diner, he prepped her, his voice a little tight. "Hey, you remember the lady from the other night? The one I gave my jacket to?" Maya nodded. "The cold lady. Yeah, well, she might be at the diner. We're going to have hot chocolate with her." Maya's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I show her my necklace?" "Sure, kiddo," he said, his own nerves warring with his daughter's pure, uncomplicated excitement. He parked the truck, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The moment was here, and he had no idea if he was walking toward a simple cup of hot chocolate or a new kind of heartbreak. The corner booth was exactly as its name implied. A small, unassuming diner nestled on a quiet street corner, with large plate glass windows and a faded neon sign that buzzed softly in the twilight. It was a place frozen in time, with red vinyl booths, a checkerboard floor, and the comforting smell of coffee, frying bacon, and sugar. It was Liam and Maya's place, their weekly ritual, a small island of normalcy in their often turbulent life. Liam's hand was clammy as he pushed open the door, a little bell chiming their arrival. He scanned the room, his heart doing a nervous flip-flop, and then he saw her. She was sitting in their booth, the one in the back corner by the window. She was staring out at the street, a pensive look on her face, and she hadn't seen them yet. She was wearing a simple gray sweater, her hair down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Stripped of her fancy dress and her powerful car, she looked softer, more approachable, and yet the air of quiet elegance still clung to her. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine, not in a booth at a greasy spoon diner. Liam hesitated for a second, a wave of self-consciousness washing over him. This was a mistake. He was out of his depth. But then Maya tugged on his hand, her voice a loud whisper. "There she is, Daddy." Isabella's head turned, and her face broke into that same stunning smile he remembered from the construction site. The smile reached her eyes this time, chasing away the shadows and making them shine. "Hi," she said as they slid into the booth opposite her. "I was starting to think I'd been stood up." "Never," Liam said, his own nerves easing slightly in the face of her warmth. "We're sticklers for tradition." I'm Maya, his daughter announced, holding up her macaroni necklace with pride. I made this today. Isabella leaned forward, her expression one of genuine admiration. Wow, Maya. That is the most beautiful necklace I have ever seen. The colors are perfect. Maya beamed, her shyness dissolving instantly. She launched into a detailed explanation of her artistic process, and Liam sat back, watching them. He watched the way Isabella listened, her chin resting in her hand, her eyes focused intently on his daughter. She wasn't faking it. She wasn't patronizing. She was genuinely engaged, laughing at all the right moments, asking thoughtful questions. A waitress, a woman named Flo, who had known Liam for years, came over with a grin. The usual, Liam? 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream? Make it 3, Flo, he said, his eyes meeting Isabella's over the top of Maya's head. The air was filled with the easy chatter of his daughter and the low hum of the diner. And for a few, precious moments, Liam allowed himself to forget the chasm between their worlds. He allowed himself to just be a man having hot chocolate with his daughter, and a beautiful, mysterious woman who made him feel things he had long since buried. It felt dangerous. It felt wonderful. The hot chocolate arrived in thick ceramic mugs, piled high with whipped cream and drizzled with chocolate sauce. Maya dug in with gusto, a white mustache appearing on her upper lip almost immediately. Liam and Isabella sipped theirs more slowly, the warmth of the mugs a welcome comfort in their hands. The conversation flowed more easily than Liam had expected. Isabella had a way of asking questions that made you want to answer, a quiet curiosity that felt genuine, not invasive. She asked about his work, about what it was like to build things from the ground up. He found himself talking about the satisfaction of seeing a blueprint turn into a home, the camaraderie of the crew, the simple pride in a hard day's work. He hadn't talked about his job with that much passion in years. In turn, he learned small, curated details about her. She told him she was, in consulting, a vague and polished term that he knew was a deflection. She said she traveled a lot for work, that she was taking some time off to reevaluate things. She spoke of cities he had only seen in movies, Paris, Tokyo, Rome, but she spoke of them with a strange detachment, as if they were just locations on a map, not places she had truly lived in. "It sounds like you have a very exciting life," he said, stirring his hot chocolate. She gave a small, wry smile. "It's busy." Not always the same thing as exciting. There was a sadness in her eyes when she said that, a flicker of the same lost look he'd seen at the bus stop. He wanted to ask more, to understand the story behind the sadness, but he didn't. It wasn't his place. Maya, meanwhile, had finished her hot chocolate and was now drawing on a napkin with a crayon Flo had given her. She was humming to herself, completely absorbed. "She seems like a very happy kid," Isabella said softly, her gaze on Maya. "She is," Liam said, his voice thick with love. "She's the best part of my life. She saved me, after her mom." The words were out before he could stop them, another crack in the armor he kept so carefully around his heart. Isabella's expression softened with that same deep empathy he'd seen before. She didn't offer platitudes or empty condolences. She just listened, her presence a quiet, steady comfort. "You're a good father, Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's obvious how much you love her." His throat tightened. It had been so long since anyone had seen him, really seen him, beyond the tired construction worker, the grieving widower, the struggling single dad. She saw the love, she saw the effort. And in that moment, in the warm, noisy diner, he felt a connection to her that was as terrifying as it was undeniable. He was falling for a woman he didn't know, a woman who was a walking, talking mystery. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was a path that could only lead to ruin. The evening ended too soon. Maya started yawning, her head drooping onto the table, the macaroni necklace askew. It was past her bedtime. Liam slid out of the booth, his movements reluctant. "We should probably get going," he said, the spell of the warm diner breaking. "Thank you for this, Isabella. It was to nice." "It was," she agreed, her smile a little sad around the edges. "Thank you for inviting me." They stood outside on the sidewalk, the air cold and sharp after the warmth of the diner. The neon sign cast a soft red glow on their faces. Maya was half asleep on her feet, leaning against Liam's leg. "I can give you a ride," Isabella offered, gesturing to her sleek gray sedan parked across the street. "It's no trouble." "We're okay," Liam said quickly, a little too quickly. "We've got the truck. Besides, it's not far." He didn't want her to see their apartment building, the one with the cracked pavement and the perpetually broken lobby light. He didn't want her to see the reality of his life, the grit and the struggle. He wanted to exist, for a little while longer, in the warm, anonymous bubble of the diner. She seemed to understand. She didn't push. "Okay," she said softly. "Well, drive safe. You too." An awkward silence fell between them, the kind that happens when neither person knows how to say goodbye, or if they even should. Will I see you again?" The question slipped out of her, quiet and vulnerable, catching him off guard. He looked at her, at the hopeful, uncertain look in her beautiful blue eyes, and his heart ached. He should say no. He should protect himself, protect Maya. A woman like her was a temporary star in his gray sky, bound to fade away. But he couldn't. He couldn't lie. "I'd like that," he heard himself say, his voice betraying the caution his brain was screaming at him. Her face lit up with a relief so palpable it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "Good," she said, a real, genuine grin spreading across her face. "I'd like that too." She didn't ask for his number, and he didn't offer it. The lack of logistics made the whole thing feel fragile, ephemeral, like a dream he might wake up from. But as he buckled a sleepy Maya into her car seat and drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Isabella was still standing on the sidewalk, watching them go, a solitary figure bathed in the soft red glow of the diner's sign. And Liam knew with a terrifying certainty that he was already in too deep. The feeling of being in too deep gnawed at Liam for the rest of the weekend. It was a low, persistent hum of anxiety beneath the surface of his everyday life. On Saturday, as he and Maya built a wobbly fortress out of couch cushions and blankets, he found his mind drifting to Isabella. He wondered where she was, what she was doing. Was she in some impossibly chic apartment, overlooking the city, or was she in another boardroom, commanding respect with her quiet poise? The two images didn't reconcile, and the mystery of her was a puzzle he couldn't stop trying to solve. He knew he was romanticizing it, building her up in his mind into something she probably wasn't. She was just a person with her own problems, her own sadness. But she was a person who had listened, who had seen him, and that was a powerful, addictive thing. On Sunday, he took Maya to the park. As she climbed the monkey bars, her laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air, he sat on a bench and replayed their conversation. Her consulting job, her detached talk of travel, the sadness in her eye-sit all pointed to a life of privilege, but also one of loneliness. He felt a strange, protective urge, a desire to shield her from whatever it was that made her look so lost. It was a ridiculous notion. A woman like her didn't need his protection. But the feeling persisted. He was falling for the idea of her, for the mystery of her, and he knew it was a dangerous game. He had nothing to offer her. His life was a constant struggle, a tightrope walk over a chasm of debt and uncertainty. His world was small, confined to the construction site, their tiny apartment, and these precious, fleeting moments with his daughter. Her world was vast, unknown, and likely filled with people and things he couldn't even imagine. To invite her into his life felt like inviting a storm into a house made of cards. And yet, the thought of not seeing her again was a physical ache in his chest. On Monday, he found an excuse. It was flimsy, transparent, but it was the best he could come up with. He had left his favorite coffee mug at the diner on Friday. It was a Leahy's favorite mug, was sitting on his kitchen counter, chipped and stained, but it was an excuse to go back, to see if she might be there, to leave a note with Flo, anything. After work, His heart pounding a nervous rhythm, he walked into the corner booth. The diner was quiet, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Flo was wiping down the counter. "Liam, back so soon? Did you forget something?" "Yeah, Flo," he said, trying to sound casual. "My coffee mug. The blue one." Flo frowned. "Didn't see it, honey, but I'll keep an eye out." He felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course, she hadn't seen it. "No worries," he said, turning to leave. And then he saw it. Tucked into the small, built-in jukebox selector at the back booth was a single, folded napkin. His breath caught. He walked over slowly and pulled it out. On it, in elegant, looping handwriting, was a phone number. And beneath it, 2 words, "Just in case." Liam stared at the phone number, on the napkin, for what felt like an eternity. It was a simple string of digits, but it felt like a key, a dare, a promise. It was an invitation, a bridge between their 2 disparate worlds, and he had no idea if he was brave enough to cross it. He stood in the quiet diner, the scent of old coffee and lingering hope in the air, and a war raged within him. His head, the logical, protective part of him, screamed at him to throw the napkin away. It told him that this was a fantasy, a fleeting moment of connection with someone who would inevitably disappear, leaving him and Maya to pick up the pieces. A woman with a car like that, and a past she was so vague about, was not looking for a life with a struggling construction worker. She was a tourist, and he was just a temporary distraction. But his heart, that stubborn, foolish organ that had been dormant for so long, whispered something else. It whispered of the kindness in her eyes, the genuine laughter, the way she had looked at Maya with such tenderness. It reminded him of the profound loneliness he had felt before she appeared, a loneliness he hadn't even been fully aware of until she had briefly dispelled it. He folded the napkin carefully, as if it were a precious artifact, and tucked it into the pocket of his jeans. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't throw it away. That night, after Maya was asleep, he sat on his worn-out couch in the dim light of the living room, the napkin on the coffee table in front of him. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. He picked up his phone a dozen times, his thumb hovering over the numbers. What would he even say? "Hi, it's the construction worker you felt sorry for?" No. He had no game, no charm, no witty lines. He only had his own raw, unvarnished truth, and he wasn't sure that was something she wanted. The fear of rejection was a cold, heavy weight in his chest. But the fear of regret, of letting this slip away without even trying, was heavier. He thought of Sarah, of her constant refrain. "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Liam." She had been the brave one, the one who had always pushed him to take a chance. He took a deep, shuddering breath, picked up the phone one last time, and dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. The phone rang once, twice. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was about to hang up, to retreat back into the safety of his solitude, when she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, questioning, and instantly recognizable. All the speeches he had rehearsed in his head vanished. He was left with nothing but a single, honest word. "Hi," he said, his own voice barely a whisper. "It's Liam." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a heart-stopping second he thought she was going to hang up. But then he heard her let out a soft breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "Liam," she said, her voice full of a warmth that traveled through the phone and settled right in his chest. "I was hoping you'd call." The conversation that followed was both awkward and surprisingly easy. They didn't talk about anything important, not really. They talked about their days, about the weather, about a funny thing Maya had said. It was the kind of small talk that fills the spaces between people who are trying to get to know each other, a delicate dance of questions and answers. And yet, beneath the surface of the mundane conversation, something deeper was happening. Liam found himself relaxing, the tension in his shoulders easing with every minute that passed. He was just talking to Isabella, a woman with a kind voice and a gentle laugh. He wasn't talking to a mystery, or a symbol of a world he couldn't reach. He was just talking to her. He learned that she was staying in a small rented house on the other side of town, a place she described as aggressively beige. He learned that she was a terrible cook, that she had once tried to make toast and had set off the smoke alarm. He learned that she loved old black and white movies and the smell of rain on hot pavement. They were small, insignificant details, but they were humanizing. They were cracks in the polished, elegant facade she presented to the world, glimpses of the real person underneath. At one point, Maya stirred in her sleep, and Liam went to check on her. When he came back to the phone, he said, "Sorry, just had to re-tuck the monster in." "She's not a monster," Isabella said softly. "She's a miracle." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "Yeah," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "She is." The conversation wound down naturally, a slow, reluctant tapering off. Neither of them wanted to be the first to say goodbye. "I should let you get some sleep," she said finally. "You have to be up early for work." "Yeah," he said, a note of disappointment in his voice. "Isabella?" "Yes, Liam?" "I'm glad I called." "Me too," she whispered. "Good night." When he hung up the phone, the apartment didn't feel as empty as it usually did. It was still quiet, still filled with the ghosts of his past and the anxieties of his future, but now there was something else, too. A small, fragile flicker of warmth. A possibility. He walked over to the window and looked out at the sleeping city. He still didn't know who Isabella really was, or what she was doing in his town. He still knew, on a rational level, that this was a temporary, impossible thing. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt a stirring of something he had thought was long dead, a desire to find out what happened next. And that, he realized, was a very dangerous and very wonderful thing. Their second date, if it could be called that, was a walk in the park. It was her idea. She had called him a few days later, her voice a little hesitant, and asked if he and Maya would be free on Saturday. "Nothing fancy," she had promised, "just some fresh air." Liam had agreed immediately, his heart doing a stupid, youthful leap. The park was bathed in the golden light of a perfect autumn afternoon. The trees were a riot of red and gold, and the air was crisp and clean. Maya ran ahead of them, chasing squirrels and collecting fallen leaves, her laughter a bright, clear sound that seemed to make the whole world better. Liam and Isabella walked side by side on the gravel path, a comfortable silence between them. He had been nervous again, but her presence was calming. She wore jeans, a simple cream-colored sweater, and the same flat boots as before. She looked beautiful, but in a way that was accessible, real. "This is nice," she said, tilting her face up to the sun. "I haven't done this in, I can't remember how long." "Done what?" he asked. "Just walked. With no destination, no agenda." He understood that. His own life was a series of destinations: work, school, the grocery store, home. There was rarely time for aimless wandering. They found a bench overlooking a small pond, the water glittering in the sunlight. Maya was at the water's edge, talking to a family of ducks. "She has such a free spirit," Isabella said, watching her. "I was never like that. I was always contained." "What do you mean?" he asked, turning to look at her. She sighed, her gaze distant. "My childhood was very structured. Tutors, lessons, expectations. There wasn't a lot of room for just being a kid." It was another breadcrumb, another small clue to the puzzle of her life. He could picture it, a quiet, lonely little girl in a big, empty house. It made his heart ache for her. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said, giving him a small, sad smile. "It made me who I am." "And who is that?" he asked, the question bolder than he intended. She looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "I'm still trying to figure that out," she said, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it. The honesty of her admission was a punch to the gut. Here was this beautiful, poised, elegant woman, and she was just as lost as he was. Maybe they weren't from such different worlds after all. Maya came running back to them then, her hands full of colorful leaves, her face flushed with excitement. "Look what I found!" she exclaimed, holding them out for Isabella to see. Isabella took the leaves, examining each one with a seriousness that made Maya beam. "These are treasures, Maya," she said. And Liam knew, as he watched them together, that he was witnessing something special, something real. He was no longer just falling for a mystery. He was falling for the woman who saw the beauty in a handful of fallen leaves, the woman who was trying to find her way back to herself. And he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that he wanted to be there to see her arrive. The days that followed settled into a new, tentative rhythm. They didn't see each other every day, but the connection was there, a steady, humming bass line beneath the noise of their lives. They talked on the phone most nights, their conversations growing longer, more personal. He told her about Sarah, about their whirlwind romance, about the devastating emptiness she had left behind. He told her about his struggles, about the constant fear of not being enough for Maya. He had never been so vulnerable with anyone, but with Isabella, it felt safe. She, in turn, shared more of herself. She spoke of a childhood spent in boarding schools, of parents who were more like business partners, of a life where love was conditional, tied to achievement and success. She never gave specifics, never mentioned names or companies, but he could read between the lines. He could feel the weight of the gilded cage she had escaped from. One evening, she called him, her voice tight with a frustration he hadn't heard before. "I can't figure out my stupid thermostat," she said. "It's freezing in here and I think I've made it worse." "What's it doing?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "It's making a weird clicking sound, and the air coming out of the vents is colder than it is outside." He laughed. "Okay, stay put. I'm coming over." He found her in her aggressively beige rental house, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the thermostat as if it had personally betrayed her. The house was neat, impersonal, and sparsely decorated. It was a place to exist, not to live. He had the thermostat fixed in under 10 minutes, a loose wire, a simple fix. She watched him, her expression a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "How did you do that?" "I work with my hands," he said with a shrug. "Things just make sense to me." "Nothing makes sense to me right now," she confessed, her voice small. They ended up sitting on her generic rental couch, a safe distance between them, and talking for hours. The air was thick with an unspoken attraction, a magnetic pull that was both thrilling and terrifying. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to close the distance between them. But he didn't. It was too soon. It was too fragile. He was acutely aware of the line between them, the line he was so afraid to cross. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, "you don't have to be alone in this." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the dim light of the hallway. "I'm not," she whispered. Not anymore. He walked back to his truck, his heart a wild, chaotic drum in his chest. This was no longer a crush, no longer a fantasy. This was real. He was falling in love with Isabella, and he knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and petrifying, that his life was never going to be the same. The fragile bubble of their burgeoning relationship was bound to pop. Liam knew it, on some deep, instinctual level. The real world, with its harsh realities and its cruel timing, was waiting just outside the frame. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday. He was at work, high up on the scaffolding, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Isabella. "Something's come up. I have to go out of town for a few days." "I'm so sorry." A cold knot formed in his stomach. Out of town. Just like that. He texted back, trying to sound casual, unbothered. "Everything okay?" The reply took a long time to come. "It's complicated. I'll explain when I get back, I promise." But she didn't get back in a few days. A week passed, then 10 days. Her texts became less frequent, more vague. She was sorry. Things were taking longer than she expected. She missed him. Liam tried to be patient, to be understanding. He told himself that she had a life, a career, responsibilities he knew nothing about. but the silence was a breeding ground for his insecurities. The old, familiar voices started whispering in his head. She was gone for good. She had met someone else. She had realized that a relationship with a struggling construction worker was a dead end. He was a fool to have ever believed it could be anything more. He tried to hide his anxiety from Maya, but she was too perceptive. "Is Isabella mad at us, Daddy?" she asked one night at dinner, her voice small. "No, sweet pea," he said, forcing a smile. "She's just busy with work." But Maya's question was a dagger to his heart. He had let her get attached. He had let this woman into their small, fragile world, and now she was gone. He had been reckless, and Maya was the one who would pay the price. He threw himself into his work, taking on extra shifts, pushing his body to the point of exhaustion. It was the only way to quiet the noise in his head. He was tired, he was heartsick, and he was angry at her, for her silence, but mostly at himself, for his own foolish, hopeful heart. Then, one afternoon, as he was scrolling through the news on his phone during his lunch break, he saw it. The headline was a punch to the gut. "Elusive billionaire Isabella Thorne resurfaces to finalize hostile takeover of rival tech giant." And beneath the headline was a picture. It was her. Not the Isabella he knew, the one with the soft sweater and the sad smile. This was Isabella Thorne, the CEO. She was stepping out of a black car, surrounded by men in suits. She wore a power dress. Her hair was perfect. Her expression was one of cool, formidable confidence. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She looked like a complete stranger. Liam stared at the screen, the world around him tilting on its axis. Billionaire. CEO. It all clicked into place: the vague consulting job, the expensive car, the detached talk of travel. It had all been a lie. Not a direct lie, but a lie of omission, a carefully constructed facade. He felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't just a fool, he had been played. He was a project, a curiosity, a brief, charitable detour in the life of a woman who bought and sold companies like he bought groceries. The anger was a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. He felt used, humiliated. He had opened up his heart, his life, his daughter's life, to a woman who was living a lie. He closed the browser, his hand shaking. The fragile bubble hadn't just popped, it had been shattered into a million pieces. And he was left standing in the wreckage, colder and more alone than ever before. The anger was a fire in Liam's chest, burning hot and bright for 2 full days. He went to work, he came home, he went through the motions of being a father, but underneath he was simmering with a righteous fury. How dare she? How dare she waltz into his life, make him feel seen, make his daughter love her, all while hiding a secret of that magnitude? It was a betrayal, plain and simple. He deleted her number from his phone. He threw away the napkin she had left at the diner. He tried to erase her from his mind, to relegate her to a painful but necessary lesson learned. He told himself he was better off, that he had dodged a bullet. A relationship with a billionaire was an absurdity, a fairy tale for fools, and he was no fool. But by the 3rd day, the fire of his anger began to bank, leaving behind the cold, gray ashes of a deeper, more painful emotion: hurt. The fury had been a shield, a way to protect himself from the crushing weight of his own disappointment, but he couldn't sustain it. Because when he was honest with himself, when he let his guard down in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, he knew that the woman in the power dress in that news photo wasn't the woman he had fallen for. He had fallen for the Isabella who had listened to his stories with tears in her eyes. He had fallen for the Isabella who had marveled at Maya's macaroni necklace. He had fallen for the Isabella who had looked at him, a dust-covered construction worker, and seen a good man. Was that woman a lie? Or was she the real one, the one trapped inside the billionaire's armor? The questions tormented him, leaving him in a state of confused, heartsick limbo. He missed her. It was a simple, undeniable truth. He missed her laugh, her quiet presence, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about something she was passionate about. He missed the feeling of not being so utterly alone in the world. He was lost, adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. He didn't know what to believe, what to feel. All he knew was that the silence on the other end of the line was a gaping wound, and he had no idea how to heal it. One night, as he was tucking Maya into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, serious eyes. "Daddy," she said, "I miss Isabella." "I know, sweet pea," he said, his voice thick. "Me too. Do you think she'll ever come back?" He didn't have an answer. He just kissed her forehead, turned out the light, and walked back into the living room, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of simple, solid truths. But Isabella Thorne had shattered that foundation, and he was left standing in the ruins with no blueprint for how to rebuild. Isabella stood on the balcony of her penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. The deal was done. The takeover was complete. She had won. The business world was buzzing with her name, praising her strategic brilliance, her ruthless execution. She should have been celebrating. She should have been feeling triumphant, powerful, vindicated. Instead, she felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The victory was a hollow echo in a life that had become devoid of real meaning. All she could think about was Liam. She had seen the news articles, the ones that had inevitably followed her reappearance. She knew he would have seen them, too. She could picture his face, the slow dawning of understanding, the inevitable hardening of his features as he realized her deception. She had shattered his trust, and the knowledge of it was a physical pain in her chest. She had tried to call him a dozen times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He had deleted her number, blocked her, erased her from his life. And she couldn't blame him. She had lied to him. Not with her words, but with her silence. She had been a coward, too afraid to tell him the truth, too afraid that the weight of her name, her fortune, her world, would crush the fragile, beautiful thing that had been growing between them. She had been trying to protect it, but in the end, she had been the one to destroy it. She had come back to her world to handle the crisis, telling herself it would only be for a few days. She had told herself she could fix the mess, assert her control, and then go back to him, to the quiet, real life she had found with him and Maya. But her world had a way of pulling you back in, of reminding you of your obligations, your responsibilities. The few days had turned into 2 weeks, a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and strategic battles. And with every day that passed, she felt herself slipping further away from the woman she had started to become, the woman who walked in parks and laughed at burnt thermostats. She missed them. The ache of it was a constant, dull throb. She missed Maya's bright, innocent chatter. She missed Liam's quiet strength, his tired smile, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. She had traded all of that for this view from the top of a lonely, gilded cage. She walked back inside and picked up her phone. She couldn't call him, but there was another way. She opened a new browser, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't a CEO for nothing. She knew how to find people, how to get things done. It was a long shot, a desperate, Hail Mary pass, but she had to try. She had to do something to prove, to him and to herself, that the woman he had met was real, and that she was worth fighting for. A month after he'd seen the headline, Liam was still trying to find his footing. Life had reverted to its previous state of quiet struggle, but the colors seemed duller now, the silence heavier. He and Maya had their routines: work, school, the library, the park, but the joy felt muted, shadowed by a loss that neither of them spoke of but both of them felt. The bills were still piling up, and a new notice from the landlord had appeared under their door, this one with more red ink than the last. He was falling behind, and he didn't know how he was going to catch up. He was considering taking on a second job, something at night after Maya was asleep, though the thought of it filled him with a bone-deep weariness. One Saturday, they were at the community center, the same one where Maya's after-school program was held. Liam had volunteered to help fix a set of broken shelves in the center's small, underfunded library. It was unpaid work, but it felt good to be useful, to fix something that was broken. As he worked, Maya sat at a small table, drawing with a set of crayons. The center's director, a kind, overworked woman named Mrs. Gable, came over to him, a letter in her hand. "Liam," she said, her face glowing with an excitement he hadn't seen in a long time. "You are not going to believe this." She handed him the letter. It was on thick, creamy stationery with a letterhead he didn't recognize. The Lighthouse Foundation. He scanned the letter, his eyes widening with every word. The Lighthouse Foundation, a private philanthropic organization, had chosen their community center for its annual Anchor Grant. The grant was substantial, enough to not only renovate the entire center, but also to expand its programs, to hire more staff, to create a new computer lab for the kids. It was a miracle, a lifeline for a place that was always on the verge of sinking. "Isn't it wonderful?" Mrs. Gable said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's completely anonymous. They just said they were inspired by the center's commitment to the community." Liam felt a strange, dizzying sensation. Anonymous. The Lighthouse Foundation. He had a sudden, overwhelming suspicion. That night, after Maya was asleep, he sat down at his old, slow computer and typed the Lighthouse Foundation into the search engine. The foundation's website was sleek, professional, and deliberately vague. It spoke of empowering communities and investing in potential. There was no list of donors, no board of directors mentioned. It was a digital ghost, but Liam was a man who knew how to dig. He spent hours following a trail of digital breadcrumbs, cross-referencing public records, searching for any connection. And finally, deep in the archives of a financial news site, he found it. A small, throwaway line in an article about next-generation philanthropists. Isabella Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, is also the sole and anonymous benefactor of the Lighthouse Foundation, an organization she created to honor her late grandmother, a woman she has described as the only lighthouse in my stormy childhood. The words hit him like a physical blow. It was her. She hadn't just given them a grant, she had thrown them a lifeline. She had done it quietly, anonymously, without asking for anything in return. It wasn't charity, it was a testament. It was her way of saying, "I see you, I see your world, and it matters." He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the conflict on his face. This didn't change the fact that she had lied, but it did change the narrative. This wasn't the act of a woman playing games, this was the act of a woman who cared. And Liam, a man who had been drowning in his own pride and hurt, was suddenly forced to confront a new, terrifying possibility. Maybe he had been wrong. The knowledge that Isabella was behind the grant sat with Liam for days, a heavy, complicated weight. It was a gesture of such profound generosity that it was impossible to ignore. But it was also a reminder of the vast, unbridgeable chasm between their worlds. She could solve the problems of an entire community with the stroke of a pen, while he was struggling to keep the lights on. The power imbalance was staggering, and it only reinforced his feeling that they were a mismatched, impossible pair. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to call her, to thank her, to tell her that he understood. But his pride, that stubborn, foolish pride, held him back. To acknowledge the grant felt like accepting charity, like admitting his own inadequacy, and so he remained silent, locked in a stalemate with his own heart. The tipping point came, as it always did, from Maya. One evening she came to him with a drawing she had made. It was a picture of the three of them, Liam, Maya, and Isabella standing in front of the community center. But the community center was bright and new, with a shiny red roof and a garden full of flowers. Above them, the sun was a giant, smiling face. "This is us in the future," she said, her voice full of a child's unwavering optimism. "When the center is all fixed up, and Isabella is back." Liam's throat tightened. He looked at the drawing, at the three stick figures holding hands, and something inside him broke. Who was he protecting with his silence? Not Maya. She wanted Isabella back, and not himself. His pride was a cold, lonely companion. He was letting his own fear and insecurity dictate their future, and in doing so, he was hurting the one person he was trying to protect. He had to do something. He couldn't call her. He still didn't have her number. He couldn't write to her. He had no address. But he had to reach out, to send a signal, to let her know that he had seen her message. He thought for a long time, and then he knew what he had to do. The next day, he went to a small, local nursery and spent the last of his grocery money on a single, small sapling. It was a lighthouse maple, the nursery owner told him, a variety known for its resilience and its brilliant autumn colors. That evening, after work, he took the sapling and a shovel to the small, neglected patch of grass in front of the community center. He dug a hole in the hard, unforgiving ground, his muscles aching, his hands raw. He planted the tree carefully, tamping the earth around its base, giving it a new home. He didn't put up a sign. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. It was a quiet, anonymous act, a message sent out into the universe. It was a gesture of faith, a symbol of a new beginning. It was his way of saying, "I see you too, and I'm ready to start again." He didn't know if she would ever see it, or if she would understand what it meant. But as he stood back and looked at the small, hopeful tree, a solitary sentinel in the gathering dusk, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He had let go of his pride, and in its place he had planted a seed of hope. Isabella was in a board meeting, a sterile, glass-walled room on the 40th floor, when her phone buzzed with an alert. It was from a news clipping service she used, one that was programmed to flag any mention of the Lighthouse Foundation. Usually the alerts were for dry, financial reports. But this one was different. The headline read, "Mysterious Lighthouse Maple appears at local community center." Her heart stopped. She clicked the link, her hand trembling slightly. The article was from a small local online paper, the kind that covered town hall meetings and high school football games. It described how a single, anonymous person had planted a small maple tree in front of the recently grant-funded community center. The reporter, clearly charmed by the story, had dubbed it the Lighthouse Maple, a symbol of the community's gratitude and hope. And there was a picture. It was a simple photo of a small, solitary tree, its leaves a brilliant crimson against the backdrop of the setting sun. There was nothing in the photo to connect it to Liam. No name, no face. But she knew it was him. It was his quiet, steady, understated way of speaking. He hadn't called, he hadn't written, he had planted a tree. It was a gesture so full of a hope, so profound, so deeply in character for the man she had fallen in love with, that it took her breath away. He had seen her message, and he had sent one back. He was ready. "Miss Thorne?" The voice of her chairman cut through her reverie. "Are you with us?" She looked up, her eyes scanning the faces around the table, the powerful, ambitious men and women who made up her world. They were waiting for her decision, for her strategic input. And in that moment, she felt a clarity she hadn't felt in her entire life. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm afraid I have to cut this meeting short. I have a tree to see." She didn't wait for their reaction. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She went back to her office, her mind racing. She had a choice to make. She could continue to live this life of power and influence and profound, aching loneliness. Or she could choose something else. She could choose the man who planted trees as a way of saying, "I love you." She could choose the little girl with the macaroni necklace. She could choose a life that was messy and complicated and real. It was the biggest risk she had ever taken, bigger than any hostile takeover, bigger than any billion-dollar deal. But for the first time in her life, she knew, with an absolute certainty, that it was a risk worth taking. She called her pilot. "Get the jet ready," she said. "I'm going home." Liam was working late, trying to finish a framing job before a storm rolled in, when a familiar gray sedan pulled up to the construction site. The sun had already set, and the site was cast in the harsh, artificial glow of the work lights. He paused, his hammer in his hand, and watched as Isabella got out of the car. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair pulled back, her face pale in the stark light. She looked tired, but she also looked determined. She walked toward him, her steps sure and steady on the uneven ground. She stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged with a year's worth of unspoken words. "You planted a tree," she said, her voice soft. "It was a nice tree," he replied, his own voice rough. "The article said it was a lighthouse maple," she said. A small, hopeful smile playing on her lips seemed appropriate. A long silence stretched between them, the only sound the distant hum of the city. "I'm sorry, Liam," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything, for the lies, for the silence. I was a coward. I was so afraid of my world breaking yours that I broke it myself." "I was a fool," he said, his own voice cracking. "I was so wrapped up in my own pride, my own fear, that I pushed you away. I was so afraid of getting hurt again that I hurt you instead." "I'm not that woman anymore, Liam," she said, taking a step closer. "The one in the power dress. I quit. I walked away from it all." He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You what?" "I handed the company over to my board," she said. "I kept the foundation, and enough to be comfortable, but the rest, it's just noise. It's not what I want." "What do you want, Isabella?" he asked, his voice a whisper. She was standing in front of him now, so close he could see the tears shining in her eyes. "I want a life that's real," she said. "I want a home. I want to watch Maya grow up. I want to watch trees grow." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "I want you, Liam. If you'll still have me." He didn't answer with words. He dropped the hammer, closed the distance between them, and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her, a kiss that was full of a year of pent-up longing, of regret, of a hope that had refused to die. It was a kiss that tasted of sawdust and rain and second chances. It was a kiss that said, "Welcome home." The community center was transformed. The grant from the Lighthouse Foundation had worked its magic, turning the tired, run-down building into a bright, vibrant hub of activity. There was a new computer lab, a renovated library, a colorful playroom for the younger kids, and in the front, the lighthouse maple stood tall and proud, its leaves a fiery crimson in the autumn sun. A small plaque had been placed at its base. It didn't say who had planted it. It just said, "For new beginnings." One crisp Saturday afternoon, a small, informal wedding was held in the center's newly planted garden. There were no fancy invitations, no string quartets, no five-course meals. Just a gathering of friends, a handful of construction workers in their Sunday best, Mrs. Gable from the community center, and a beaming Flo from the diner. Maya was the flower girl, scattering red and gold leaves down the makeshift aisle. She wore a simple white dress and a crown of autumn flowers, and she looked like a woodland princess. Liam stood at the front, his hands shaking slightly, a single, perfect maple leaf tucked into the lapel of his new suit. He wasn't a man who was used to happiness, but he was learning. When Isabella appeared at the end of the aisle, a hush fell over the small crowd. She was breathtaking. She wore a simple, elegant, ivory dress, her hair woven with the same autumn flowers as Maya's. She carried no bouquet. Her hands were empty, ready to take his. She walked toward him, her eyes locked on his, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. They didn't exchange fancy, poetic vows. Their promises were simple, heartfelt, and real. "I promise to fix your thermostat," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion, "and to always be your safe harbor in a storm." "And I promise to never hide from you again," Isabella said, her voice a tearful whisper, "and to build a life with you that is more valuable than any fortune." They exchanged simple, solid gold bands, and as the makeshift officiant, a grinning Sal, pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the small crowd. Liam pulled Isabella into his arms, his heart overflowing with a love so profound, so unexpected, that it felt like a miracle. He was no longer just a construction worker, and she was no longer just a billionaire. They were a family. And as they stood in the golden light of that perfect autumn day, surrounded by the people they loved, they knew that they had found something far more precious than money or power. They had found their way home. Years later, a teenage Maya sat on the porch of their beautiful, comfortable, but not ostentatious home, a home that Liam had designed and built with his own 2 hands. She was telling the story, as she often did, to her younger brother, a little boy with his father's steady brown eyes and his mother's mischievous smile. "And so," she said, her voice full of the drama of a born storyteller, "Dad, who was just a regular construction worker, gave his only jacket to Mom, who was secretly a super-rich billionaire hiding from her old life." Her brother's eyes were wide. "For real?" "For real," Maya said with a grin. "And then he planted a tree, and she quit her job, and they fell in love and lived happily ever after." From the doorway, Liam and Isabella watched their children, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. Their life wasn't a fairy tale, not really. It was messy and complicated, and full of the everyday struggles and triumphs of any family. But it was a life built on a foundation of kindness, of trust, of a love that had been strong enough to bridge 2 different worlds. Liam looked at Isabella, at the woman who had traded boardrooms for bake sales, power suits for muddy boots. She was the most beautiful, the most brilliant, the most incredible person he had ever known. "Still think it was a good trade?" he asked, his voice a low, teasing rumble. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes on their children. "It was the best deal I ever made," she said. And as the sun set, casting a warm, golden glow over their small, perfect world, they knew that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or in assets. It was measured in the quiet moments, in the shared laughter, in the simple, profound joy of a family built on the radical, life-changing power of a single act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday evening. The jacket still hung in the back of their closet, a worn, faded reminder of the day their story began. It was just an old jacket, and it was everything.